We think warmth comes from a switch, a thermostat, or maybe a roaring fireplace. But what if I told you that one medieval shepherd survived entire winters without any of them? No power, no chopped wood, no backup plan. Just ancient tricks passed down by firelight, 7 of them. Quiet, clever, and still more effective than most heating systems today. They didn't just keep him alive, they kept him warm. And one day, if the grid goes down, you might be wishing you knew these too. Toma was 40. He lived alone high in the Pyrenees. No road, no neighbors, no help coming if things went south. The mountains were beautiful in the fall, burnt gold crisp air silence that felt holy. But Toma didn't see beauty. He saw warning signs. The wind had shifted. The sheep grew restless. And the birds. They'd flown weeks ago. Winter was on its way. And when it arrived up here, it didn't knock politely. It broke down the door. Toma had no firewood stacked high, no endless forest to chop from. Just a few dry logs, a smoky hearth, and the memory of an old man's voice telling stories beside a flame. His grandfather had survived worse barely, not by strength, not by luck, but by using tricks most people today wouldn't recognize. Toma didn't read them in books. He lived them. Every year, same as last. Today, we depend on thermostats and oil tanks. Toma depended on the land, the animals, and the way frost settled on the ground like a quiet threat. Now, as snow clouds crept over the ridges, he stood outside his hut, watching his breath hang in the air. It was time. Time to remember. Time to act. By late autumn, the sun rose late and fell fast. But for Toma, even 20 minutes of warmth was a resource, not a luxury. He didn't waste it. Each afternoon, he'd drag his stool out to the southern wall of his hut, not for the view, but because the stones held heat like a memory trapped in rock. That wall wasn't random. It had been built by his grandfather, and maybe by his grandfather's father. Wide, low, and thick, stacked from river stones smoothed by centuries of flow. Each morning the stones drank in the sun's warmth, and each night they gave it back, slow, steady, silent. No cords, no buttons, no fire, just the earth doing what it always had if you knew how to work with it. Toma had learned early warmth isn't always about flame. Sometimes it's about what you hold on to. So he leaned against that wall every evening until his back soaked in the heat. At night, he slept beside the same stones, using them like a dog might curl next to a fireplace. They stayed warm for hours. And when the wind howled through the cracks of his door, he didn't shiver because the heat was already in the room. Today, most of us tap a thermostat and wait. But the moment the grid goes down, we're lost. We forget the sun itself can heat a home if we give it something solid to hold on to. And that's the trick: thermal mass. Stone, brick, clay. Anything heavy that can absorb heat and slowly release it back. Modern architects are bringing it back now. Passive solar houses, earth-bermed walls. But Toma, he never left it behind. He didn't call it thermal mass. He just knew. Put the stones where the sun hits hardest. Then let them do the work. Old wisdom doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just leans quietly against a sunlit wall and stays warm long after the fire's gone out. The first frost came early that year. Thin ice formed in the water bucket by dusk, and by dawn the surface had cracked like old glass. Toma didn't panic, but he also didn't sleep on the floor anymore. Instead, he started digging. At the far corner of his hut, out of the wind and away from the door, he carved a shallow pit into the packed earth. Not deep. Just wide enough for his frame and a little room to turn. He laid a bed of straw at the bottom, then covered it with a thick wool blanket. Above, a sheet of old cloth stretched like a tent roof. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even comfortable, but it worked. The pit stayed 5, sometimes 10 degrees warmer than the room around it, low shielded from drafts and surrounded by insulating earth. It was a cocoon, a quiet womb of dirt and wool. He didn't think of it as a system. It was just what his father did when the roof leaked and the fire died. You didn't wait for help. You got low. You got quiet. And you slept like a creature of the earth. These days we scoff at sleeping on the ground. We want memory foam and mattress warmers. But in an outage, a storm, a blackout that lasts days, the cold won't care what you paid for your bed. Toma knew better. He stayed low because heat rises. And he dug deep because the ground held steady, unlike the wind outside. Some nights he would lie in that little pit, eyes open, watching his breath swirl above like smoke. It felt primitive, but it felt safe. That's the thing about ancient wisdom. It doesn't promise luxury, but it keeps you alive. When warmth isn't guaranteed and the firewood's all gone, sometimes the smartest thing you can do is dig a hole and sleep like you're part of the land again. By mid-December, firewood had become a kind of currency. Every log burned was a trade warmth now or survival later. Toma didn't have enough for both. So instead of keeping the fire going all day, he used it once at dusk. And while the soup simmered and the shadows stretched, he set his stones beside the flames. Not just any stones, flat ones, heavy, rounded from years of river wear. He laid them near the coals, just close enough to drink in the heat, not crack from it. Then, as darkness fell, he pulled one into his lap. It was like cradling the sun. The warmth soaked into his legs, his belly, his hands. And when it faded, he swapped it for another. Stone by stone, hour by hour, he stretched a single fire into an evening's worth of comfort. He even slid one beneath his bedding wrapped in wool to keep the cold from gnawing at his spine overnight. No sparks, no smoke, just stored heat passed from rock to skin like an unspoken promise. Today, we call it thermal mass or radiant heat transfer. Engineers write papers on it. Toma just called it smart. Because when your resources are thin, you don't waste warmth on air. You put it where it touches you. In a blackout, most folks pile on blankets. But Toma, he heated stone. And stone never caught fire, never needed feeding, never failed when the wind howled. It just stayed warm quietly, dependably, like the land itself. Some nights sitting on that stone, he'd remember his grandfather doing the same. Back when winters were even colder and everything creaked with ice. No one taught Toma this. He watched. He remembered. And he trusted the silence between the flames. You don't need a medieval hut to try it. Just a stone, a fire, and a reason to hold on to heat that doesn't vanish with the embers. Because sometimes survival isn't about the blaze. It's about what you keep after it goes out. By late December, the wind no longer whispered. It roared. Toma could feel it clawing through the cracks of his door frame, tugging at the wool wrapped around his shoulders. That night, he knew the fire alone wouldn't be enough. So the next morning, he went outside. Snow crunched beneath his boots. The cold bit hard, but he'd waited long enough. He began stacking stones. Not just anywhere. He knew the wind came screaming from the north ridge, curling down the valley like a hungry dog. So he built the wall on the northern edge of the hut 3 feet high, 6 feet wide, thick, tight, angled slightly inward. It didn't stop the wind completely, but it broke its spine. Inside, the change was subtle, but real. The fire burned smaller. The heat stayed longer. Still, he wanted more. Behind the fire pit, Toma placed a slab of slate dull, curved almost black. He'd found it years ago near the creek. Now he set it upright, tilted slightly toward the room. That night, when the fire glowed red and the wind hissed like a snake, the warmth bounced, not into the wall, into him. He didn't have a mirror, but he'd built one out of stone. In today's world, we use radiant foil panels and high-tech insulation. Toma used rock and instinct. The goal was the same: keep heat and keep wind out. He didn't call it engineering. He called it paying attention. Every draft had a source. Every ember deserved a second chance. And when you only had one fire a day, you made sure it pulled double duty. Some people say you can't fight the cold, but Toma knew you could shape the fight. Turn it sideways. Use the wind's habits against itself. You don't need a cabin in the Alps to try this. A few stones, a bit of angle, and the humility to learn from what doesn't speak. Because when winter comes knocking, you can either open the door or build a wall that tells it to wait. By January, the fire was rationed. The logs had grown scarce, and every night became a negotiation: heat or hunger. Toma chose hunger. He saved the wood for cooking, not for comfort. And when the flames died, the cold moved in like an unwelcome guest. That night, he didn't sleep alone. He led 2 of his sheep, smaller ewes, into the hut. They hesitated at first, unsure of the boundary, but when Toma laid fresh straw in the corner and whispered softly, they stepped inside. He laid beside them, wrapped in his cloak, back to wool chest, to fleece. And for the first time in days, he felt warmth that didn't come from fire. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't clean, but it was real. 2 adult sheep can radiate over 800 BTUs of heat an hour, and in a small, sealed space that's enough to tip the scales between shivering and sleeping. Toma didn't think of it as a technique. He thought of it as common sense. Animals huddle for warmth in the wild. So did shepherds. Today, we keep our pets out of the bed, worried about fur and mess. But when the lights go out and the furnace dies, you'll wish for fur. Modern homes are insulated, yes, but they're also isolated from each other, from the land, from the animals that once shared our walls and our warmth. Toma lived differently, not because he wanted to, but because he had to, and in that necessity, he found a kind of closeness, not just to the sheep, but to life itself, raw, breathing, alive. Some nights he'd wake to the steady rhythm of their breath syncing with his. The frost would creep up the windows, but inside, there was life. There was heat. You don't need to sleep in a barn. But don't forget, we're animals too. And sometimes survival isn't about invention. It's about remembering the warmth that walks beside you. By late January, Toma's clothes were beginning to fail. Wool stretched thin, seams frayed. His sleeves couldn't hold back the wind anymore. There were no new coats coming, no markets, no shipments, just scraps and memory. That morning he sat by the fire and stared at the tattered cloak in his lap. Too cold to wear alone, too precious to throw away. He grabbed a handful of straw from the corner, rubbed it between his palms, and remembered his grandfather's voice. "You don't need more, you just need layers." So he worked. He stitched an inner lining from old cloth linen from a broken grain sack. Then he filled the gap between with crushed straw and tufts of matted wool. Not elegant, not quiet, but warm. When he wrapped it around his shoulders, it rustled like leaves. But the wind no longer bit, and for the first time in days he stepped outside without bracing himself. Modern jackets use synthetic fill, goose-down plastic fibers, heat-sealed foam. They work well until they tear, until they get wet, until the power goes out and there's no way to dry them. Toma's layers, they were humble, but they breathed, they dried fast, and he could repair them with nothing but a needle, a rock, and time. He didn't wear fashion, he wore function, and when the cold pressed against him, his coat pushed back. Some nights, as he moved around the hut, the straw would crackle softly under the linen. He didn't mind. It reminded him he was wearing something alive, something made from the land, not a factory. He didn't call it innovation. He called it remembering. You don't need a fancy parka to survive the cold. Just layers, space for air, a bit of straw, and the wisdom not to wait for help, but to build your own warmth. By late winter, even the mornings had grown sharp, the kind of cold that sank into fabric and bone before you even stepped outside. Toma didn't have a dryer, didn't have radiators or heated floors, but he did have a clay oven and a habit. Each night after cooking his meal, he opened the oven door and placed his clothes near the opening. Not too close, just close enough to catch the rising warmth. Wool socks, undershirts, a heavy tunic. He'd leave them there while he ate, letting them soak up every ember's breath. By the time he slipped them on, they didn't just feel warm. They felt alive. It was a simple trick, but it changed everything. That first contact with heated fabric made the cold outside seem slower to bite. It bought him time to work, to move, to breathe without bracing. In today's world, we rely on timers and buttons. Push a setting. Wait for heat. But when the grid fails, what then? Toma's oven gave him more than bread. It gave him a way to carry fire on his skin. He didn't think of it as innovation. He thought of it as rhythm. Use the fire once, cook the soup, heat the stones, warm the clothes. No waste, no excess, just flow. Some nights, as the coals dimmed, he'd hang his socks over a stick across the oven mouth, watching steam rise from the wool like breath from an animal. And in that quiet glow, he knew something we've mostly forgotten. Warmth isn't always about flame. Sometimes it's what lingers afterward, what you carry with you into the dark. Toma wasn't rich. He didn't have a furnace. He didn't have a backup plan. No thermostat, no power, no help coming. But he lived, And he stayed warm, not because he bought the latest gear, but because he remembered old things, simple things, tested things, 7 tricks, passed down through smoke, straw, stone, and instinct. They didn't need batteries, or firewood, or a manual, just a body, a bit of earth, and a mind willing to listen. Today, you might live in a heated home behind thick glass and humming vents. But tomorrow, if the grid fails, if the storm hits, if the warmth vanishes, what will you have left? The answer won't come from a store. It'll come from memory, from knowledge, from practice. Toma didn't invent these tricks. He just kept them alive. And if even one of them made sense to you, try it, test it, keep it, because the weather doesn't wait for technology. And old wisdom, it has a way of coming back when we need it most. If this story sparked something in you, subscribe. We've got more forgotten systems, real stories, and ancient tools that still beat the cold today.